In the last video, we have seen how to represent entries inside a list with an entry list item widget. And now we are ready to look at the entry page, which is the widget that we use to create and edit entries. And in principle, this page is quite similar to the edit job page that we have created earlier on in this course. So the main idea here is that we can present some input widgets so that the user can select the start and end time and add a comment, and then this data is saved to Firestore. And when we are editing an existing entry, then we should also be able to fill the form with the data that is already in Firestore. So let's take a look at how this is done. First of all, we have a static show method that we use to push a new route with a navigator. And here we create an entry page with all the required input arguments. And inside this state class, we define some local variables such as the start and end date and time, and a comment as well. And then we have the init state method, which we use to initialize these variables. And the way this works is that if we are editing an entry, then we use the values from the data model. Otherwise, we are creating a new entry, and we can set the start and edit dates to the current time for convenience. Next, I want to focus on the build method, and this is what we use to present this layout. So we have a scaffold with an up bar and an action button that we use to save our data, and we use this callback to do that. And in the body, we have a column that we use to show these items vertically, and this is surrounded by some padding, and the entire content has a parent single child scroll view, so that we can scroll if needed. And then I have these methods called build start date and build end date. And I use these to return a date time picker, which is a custom widget that I've built for this project. And we will review the code for date time picker in the next video. But for now, all that matters is that we can pass a label and selected date and selected time arguments. And these are shown in these two fields over here. And then we are notified of any changes to these values with the select date and select time callbacks. And all we do here is to call set state to update our local variables and rebuild the page. And while I'm here, I could actually rename these callbacks to be called on selected date and on selected time, as this is the naming convention that we normally use when defining callbacks in Flutter widgets. Next, we have this build duration method that we use to generate an object of type entry, and in turn we use this to calculate the duration in hours. So this is based on the difference between the end and the start time, and I've added this as a getter variable inside the entry class. And this value is then formatted with the format class that we have seen before. And finally, we have the build comment method, which is a simple text field. And this widget is initialized with a text editing controller that holds the comment value that we have set in init state. And one thing that I can point out here is that we only use the text editing controller to set the initial value, but not for anything else. And this means that we don't need to store a reference to this text editing controller in our state class. And as the user types in, we use the onChanged callback to update the comment. And you can also notice that I'm not calling setState here, because we don't need to rebuild the entire page when the comment changes. Finally, I can scroll up to focus on this method called setEntryAndDismiss, which is called when we press the create button. And this should look familiar, because the general idea here is to get an entry object from all the local state variables, and then we can try to save it with Firestore and dismiss the page if the operation succeeds. And we also show an error if the operation fails. And just to be clear, the way we get an entry object is with this method, which is used to calculate the start and end times from the local variables. And then it retrieves the document ID from the input entry or generates a new one if it doesn't exist. And then we return an entry object, making sure that the job ID from the parent job is used. So this is all there is to know about this page. And by the way, you might have noticed that I haven't actually used a Flutter form to validate and save the data. And this is because for this specific use case, I'm using some custom widgets like the date time picker that don't need to be compatible with the way we validate and save data with forms. So the main idea here is just to keep things simple, and in this case we can accomplish this with a stateful widget and some local state variables. Okay, so let's continue on the next video.